Hello everyone, and welcome to your first video on a technique called completing the square. Now let me start off by telling you I really tried not to have to learn this method in my life. I put it off all through high school. I put it off through a couple of classes in college. I insisted that I was going to do things the long, hard way, and I was not going to learn this method. The reason that I was so resistant to learning this method is because there's like 4 bazillion steps. And I thought, why do 4 bazillion steps if you don't have to do 4 bazillion steps? So I insisted on doing it the other way. Yeah, that did not work out very well for me because this way is really a lot easier once you get used to it. So we're going to do a couple of examples. So let's take a look at this problem. All right, so we have x squared plus 6x minus 12. You recognize this as a quadratic equation. And when we talk about completing the square, we're talking about working with quadratic equations. And if I were to ask you to factor this particular problem, it would not take long for you to go, oh, I hate this, because it's impossible to think of 2 numbers that multiply together to make negative 12, but add together to make positive 6. Just can't be done. I wish it could be done, but it cannot. So that means that we would have to move to the quadratic formula, right? And we know what that looks like. That's x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And if we did this, and if we got lucky, then we would get some nice numbers for x. But remember, a lot of times when we do the quadratic formula, I don't know what this one works out to be, but a lot of times when we do the quadratic formula, we get things like negative 15 root 3 plus or minus the square root of 493 over 15. And you say, oh, that's just terrible, because you had to work hard to get all of those crazy numbers. All right, so what completing the square does is it gives us a method of solving this problem without doing the quadratic formula. I'll say that again because it's really cool. It gives us a method of solving this problem without using the quadratic formula. In addition to quadratics that cannot be factored easily, it's also really good when you have this situation where you have an ugly coefficient. Now, we have learned methods to deal with ugly coefficients, but they are ugly and they require a lot of work. Completing the square is another way to approach that without going through a whole ugly coefficient calculation and possibly still winding up having to do the quadratic formula. So that is why we are learning this method. Don't be like me. Don't be stubborn and bullheaded and go your whole life, well, half of your life, without knowing this method. It really does make life easier. Plus, as you get farther on in math, you'll get textbooks that say things like, before you do these 400 really hard things, first complete the square. And you're going to be like, oh, can't I just get on to the 400 hard things? No, first I have to go back and learn this method. All right, that was my Diet Coke right there. There it goes. Okay. All right, so we are splitting this technique up into 2 parts. Why? Because as I mentioned, there are like 400 steps to completing the square. And we're just going to learn part of them in this video. So let's give ourselves a nice quadratic equation. We'll just use this one that I used before. I think I had minus 12, right? Yeah. I do not know what the answer to this problem is. And you're not going to find out the answer to this problem right now because we're only going to solve it halfway. But that's okay. That's good. All right, so the first step in solving a quadratic equation is to get it out of this format. I know I told you that in order to solve a quadratic equation, you had to have it set equal to 0. But now that we are moving on to the fancy dancy method of completing the square, we want to put it in this format. Okay? So we're going to have our x squared term, we're going to have our x term, and then our integer is going to be over on the other side. All right? Okay, so that's the first step. Then what we do is we focus on this number right here, and I'm just going to write it over here. Okay? That's that number. It's a positive 6. And what we are going to do is we are going to first divide it by 2, right? We are going to divide it by 2, and we are going to get a 3. And we are going to draw a circle around that 3. Then our next step is we are going to square the 3, and we are going to get a 9, and we are going to draw a double circle around the 9. Or if you want to, you could draw a circle with, a little sun. That would be fine too, if that's what you want to do. But you need to have a circle here, and you need to have like a sun over here or something so that you can separate these numbers. One of the things that I find confusing about completing the square is that I get excited or I get frustrated and I forget to do both of these steps, and then I use the wrong number later on, and then that causes trouble. All right, so you take this middle number here, the coefficient of just the x term, you divide it in half, you circle it, you square it, you double circle it. Okay, are we all clear? All right, now we are going to use this number right now, the double circle, and what we are going to do is we are going to add that number to both sides of the equation. So I'm going to do a plus 9 here, and that is going to equal 12 plus 9 over here. Okay, so my new equation is x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals, what does that equal? 21? 21. Okay, now I am ready to move forward. And so we're going to learn what comes next. But what I want you to be able to calculate at this point is I want you to be able to put it in the proper format, and I want you to be able to do your first circle, which is taking that x coefficient and dividing it in half. And then I want you to be able to square that and get this number over here. This is the number that gets added to both sides of the equation. All right, let's do another one, because you're thinking to yourself, oh, Miss Delisi, this is so easy. Well, good. I'm glad you think so. Let's do a harder one. Let's do one with an ugly coefficient. So let's do 4x squared minus 91x plus 3 equals 0. That's ugly, right? Okay, so our first step is to move this term over there. So that's going to be 4x squared minus 91x equals negative 3. That's our first thing. Okay, our next thing is we do have to get rid of this ugly coefficient. In this first problem that we did, there was no ugly coefficient. It was just a 1. This one, we got a 4. We got to get rid of the 4. So we are going to divide every term by 4. And I know that you are looking at this result, which is now going to be x squared minus 91 over 4x equals negative 3 over 4. And I know you're thinking, wait, you are moving in the wrong direction. You are not simplifying this problem at all. You're making it worse. Look at these huge fractions that we have going on here. I know. Don't panic. Don't panic. All right, what's the next step after we do this? Well, we take a look at this number, which is, here, wait, I'll do this in a different color, which is negative 91 over 4. And we are going to divide it in half. And at this point, it might help to remind you that dividing things in half is the same thing as multiplying by 1/2, right? That's the exact same thing. But since we're doing a fraction, I'm going to have a fraction over here, so that makes my life a little bit easier. So I get negative 91 over 8. And I circle it. And then I square it. And I'm going to have to use my calculator because I don't know what 91 squared is. 91 squared is, oops, got to use your calculator correctly, otherwise you get an error. 8281, that'll be a negative, over 64. Whoa. I kind of like the sunshine. I'm going to go with the sunshine, even though my sun is sort of amoeba shaped. That's okay. I'm going to go with it. So now, this is the number right here that I add to both sides of the equation. So this is going to be x squared minus 91 over 4x plus negative 8281 over 64 equals negative 3/4 minus, this is going to be a positive. Positive, because we have a negative number that's being squared. Positive 8281 over 64. Now I know you're thinking, uck, right? Especially because we don't even have common denominators here. That's okay. We're going to learn how to deal with all of that in the second step, okay? I just want to make sure that you are feeling good about this so far. All right, so wait, let's do one more. You should be able to do this one now yourself. Let's see. Let's make up a really hard one. Let's do 17x squared minus 3x plus 22 equals 0. Okay, what's our first step? Right, our first step is to move the 22 to the other side. So we get 17x squared minus 3x equals negative 22. Okay, what's our next step? Well, hopefully you realized that it was to divide everything by 17. So now we have, I'll write it down here, x squared minus 3 over 17x equals negative 22 over 17. Okay, what's our next step? We take this middle term right here, which is negative 3 over 17, and we multiply it by 1/2. So we get negative 3 over 34. We circle it. Now we square it. So we get 9 over 34 squared. 34 squared equals 1156. Okay? And this gets a sunshine, right? And that is what gets added to each side. So it'll be x squared minus 3 over 17x plus 9 over 1156 equals negative 22 over 17 plus 9 over 1156. There you go. So what we have learned so far is about half of the completing the square technique, but it has allowed us to calculate the number that gets added to both sides of the equation. All right, I'll see you in part 2 for the rest.